we're going to move right along here. And we have Steve Gardner, Ian Kahn, Glenn Colton, and Fred Zinkie. Thank you guys so much for being here today. I am not going to take any of your time. We're already past it. So I'm going to leave. I'm excited for this one. Thank you guys so much for being here. And yeah, let's get to it.
All right. Hey guys. Look at my friends. Steve Gardner, Glenn Colton, and Fred Zinkie. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, guys, for joining. We're here for Pitchers List and for Feeding America. So if you have an opportunity right now to make a donation, that would be amazing. I was lucky enough to ask when I was talking to Nick, and I said, hey, how about we talk about only leagues? And I said, I think I can get some pretty good people to talk about only leagues. And I got some pretty amazing people to talk about only leagues. So Steve Gardner, of course, from USA Today, Fred Zinkie from RotoWire and so many other different places, Glenn Colton from Sirius XM and so many other, and RT Sports, so many other places. So we're going to talk a little bit about only leagues. It's a remarkably fun game that I remember when I was first invited into labor, thanks to Glenn Colton. Tim McLeod.
Thanks to Steve Gardner.
That's true. And thanks to Glenn Colton. But I remember my good friend Tim McLeod telling me, you know, Ian, I'm not sure if that's the right move. Might be taking up a bit too much of your time. But I have to say, sorry for the Canadian accent there, Fred. I have to say it was probably playing in only leagues is about as much fun as I've ever had. And coming from the dynasty background, only leagues it's a totally different game, and it's all about really understanding the player pool from before the draft all the way through the entire season. So I kind of just wanted to start out just by talking about what your impression is of playing in only leagues in comparison to playing in the mixed leagues that, of course, so many people do play in. And Glenn, let's start with you.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ian. It's a totally different game because, in your 12-team mixed leagues, every player you have is an everyday player. Every player you have on your team is a good player. And you're really sort of trying to do the A versus the A minus or the B plus. And it's a totally different calculation. Whereas in the only leagues, you're going to have holes. And where the rubber meets the road is there's a lot more, in my view, a lot more strategy to filling those holes. And also knowledge of the player pool has to be deep, and you need to hit on the guys that really are bargains. When Howard Bender, picks up Juan Soto in his first year, I mean, that just changes the game. Or when Steve Gardner picks up Mike Trout in the year he breaks out, it changes the game. But it also changes the game when you pick up, guys who are going to get 400 at bats and you get them for $1 or $2. It changes. Whereas the guy who gets 400 at bats in your 12-team mixer, he's never drafted. So it's a totally different game. And I like it better. Frankly, I'm with you, Ian, because it really forces you to dig down deep, and it forces you to do what major league teams do, which is you got to get production out of that fourth outfielder. You got to get production out of that backup middle infielder. And that's what happens in the only leagues. And there are no bargains, right? We're not playing with guys who, or ladies or whatever, who don't know as much as you do. So it's not like, oh, I'll sneak this player through. Can't happen. So you really got to know who's going to take the jump, who's going to get the unexpected playing time. And I love it.
Yep. Glenn hit on something really important too, guys. Roster construction, I think, is huge when you're trying to build a roster in an only league versus a mixed league. I mean, you have to have a plan going in. You have to say, all right, I'm going to get my steals here, and this is the kind of lineup that I want to build. This is the kind of pitching staff I want to build. It's a lot more of a strategic way to build your roster, and there's not one winning way to do that. We've seen people win stars and scrubs occasionally in only leagues, but a lot of times you've got to build. I remember Jason Gray was one of the first guys that I can remember going back a few years in these leagues who built a perfectly balanced roster, and somehow, as you were saying, Ian, got playing time and at bats across the board. And I think that's where we've learned over the years the way to win most often is to have that kind of balanced roster.
Fred, what are your thoughts about that? And what is the difference for you in playing in only leagues versus playing in the mixed?
Yeah, I've always said, if you want to look all the way down MLB rosters, then only leagues are for you. If you just want to know the top 6, 7 hitters on teams, then mixed leagues are great, and they have their own challenges, and they're just as hard. With only leagues, you need to know the bench on every team in that league. You need to know setup men, middle relievers. If you want to know the entire roster and analyze the entire roster, then only leagues are for you. If you don't want to do that, then you're not really up for the only league challenge, and you should stay in mixed leagues. And again, there's nothing bad about that. It's just what kind of experience do you want? What Steve was saying about the roster construction, I think, is very true. I've tended to go on a little more stars and scrubs with my only league teams than most people do. But to do that, you have to be very confident that you can get playing time and production from $2, if we're in an auction format, for example, at Tout Wars, but you have to be confident you can get production at $2 and $3 players and real production, not 4 home runs and 2 steals or something like that. So, you can do it, but you got to be very confident that you can make that happen. And again, that's a lot. Well, it's not like every major league team, because some teams are the Dodgers and, some teams are the Yankees and everything. But for a lot of major league teams, if you're going to pay your stars, then you're going to have to find some discounted ways to get production on your real major league roster. So I do find it, very lifelike in that manner.
No, but Fred, just to go back to you for a second, because I think that talking to Glenn, I one of the fun things for me is I call on all 3 of you guys on a relatively regular basis to talk about the game, right? So Steve and I are partners in XFL. I speak to Fred Zinkie whenever I need to talk to the trade master, and I really do love talking to Fred about that. And Glenn, talk to him regularly. But what I wanted to ask, but one thing I know from what Glenn was telling me is that he was sort of leaning a little bit away from the stars and scrubs. And I'm sort of leaning away from that as well. So, and I don't know where you are with it, Steve, but Fred, it surprises me. It doesn't surprise, not bad surprise, but I wonder if you can expound on what you think works best with the stars and the scrubs outside of just finding balance everywhere through your roster.
Right. Well, I mean, for me, it's just being open-minded and being willing to go in the opposite direction. So like you said, like going away from stars and scrubs, I think especially with hitters, is the prevailing theory for only leagues. So if you're sitting in a room of 12 and the other 11 are all thinking that same thing, or mostly thinking that same thing, then there could be deals to be had at the top of that player pool. Again, I'm talking auction, not draft, but because I think most onlys use auctions. So, if I'm in an NL auction or an AL auction and no one wants to pay top dollar for those really great players, I'm open-minded to doing that. I try to stay out of $1 players, because I find the $1 players in an only, they're really bad. But if I can get a bunch, if I feel like I can target some $3, $4, $5 players to offset some 30s. I think last year in Tout NL, I can't remember exactly, but I think I probably had like a couple $30 players and a couple, it just in hitters, a couple 30s and a couple 35s, maybe even a little more than that, and maybe a high 20s too. Yeah, and they didn't even all turn out. One was Francisco Lindor. I can remember off the top of my head, definitely didn't turn out. So, I don't mind going in that direction. If that's not if the room wants to bid those guys up, then I'll spread it out. But
I think that was a successful strategy, was it not, Fred, in NL Tout Wars last year?
Yeah, and I think that's me coming from Tout Mixed, right? I did that Tout Mixed auction for 8 years before I went to the NL, where I would often go heavy stars and scrubs. And then I don't know if I'm stubborn or stupid or what, but I kept that philosophy the last 2 years in the NL. So, again, I have my dollar values going in, and if people want to bid Fernando Tatis up to where I think he shouldn't be, then I'll spread it out. But I'm open-minded to going another way. There's only so much money in the player pool. I do think maybe sometimes if the whole room's spreading out the risk, then maybe $12 players become $16 players, or $8 players become $12 players, because everybody's targeting those players.
Glenn, tell us the truth, baby.
Yeah, I'm not afraid of the dollar players. In fact, I build in to the budget at least 2 $1 pitchers and 1 or 2 $1 hitters, because there are guys always that I just have a hunch about, that I think I've seen something. And especially on the pitching side, I've never done the study, but I bet you the difference between the $5 pitcher and the $1 or $2 pitcher, the success rate is probably not that different. And if you're able to actually kick some of that money over to hitting, you can avoid, the having not enough at bats. And I also think, look, we all have our pet players we think are going to be, come out of nowhere. So why not budget the $1 or $2 for those guys, and then you can have more money to roster bigger hitters. In Tout Wars AL, which Rick Wolf and I won last year, I think we had 6 or 7 $25+ player hitters, and we just absolutely dominated the hitting pool. And we just believed that we would find, the last inexpensive hitter and a couple of inexpensive pitchers who produced. Now, of course, one of the hitters was Cedric Mullins at $1. That helped. But, you look at the stats and you say, I really believe in Patrick Sandoval. Like, I can explain this 5 or 6 ERA that he had, and I'm just going to have a spot, $1 or $2 for him. And I believe that Kyle Gibson is over colitis, and I'm going to have a spot for him at $1 or $2. And it just gives you so much flexibility to buy players' stats. We don't buy people, we buy stats, who are going to produce. So instead of having, I don't know, a middling shortstop, you end up with Tim Anderson, and it just changes the nature of your roster. So I believe in actually doing the dollar players. And if they fail, it's an easy cut.
Yeah.
Question for you.
Go ahead,
Fred.
Steve. Oh, I was just going to say, and that's what's fun about the onlys, because you can have your pet players and they can be really deep down the player pool, and you can actually grab them and do something actionable with them. We all have these guys around the majors who are bench players, emerging players who we love. But in a mixed league, you're like, I like that guy, but in all honesty, I probably shouldn't take him. I'll keep an eye on him on the waiver wire, and maybe I'll grab him at some point. In an only, you put your money where your mouth is. You grab Patrick Sandoval, right? Or someone like that. And you're like, no, I believe in this guy. And I know no one wants him. And in a mixed league, he's going undrafted and nobody's talking about him. I believe in him. You can do that in only, and that's what's really fun. Sorry for interrupting, Steve.
No, that's okay. I was going to ask Glenn, did last year, when you guys decided to do that as your plan and go cheap on pitchers, was that because of the shortened 2020 regular season and you felt like pitchers were going to be more volatile anyway? Was that a factor into your decision at all?
So honestly, no. I thought that. I believed that. It turned out to be true. But for us, we just believe that it is easier, especially in the onlys, to find pitchers that break out for $1, $2, $3 than to find the hitters that break out. I mean, for every Cedric Mullins, there was a Trevor Rogers and a Brubaker and a Sandoval and a Gibson and all these, pitchers who outproduced at $1, big time numbers, and relievers who inevitably produce big numbers. Now, look, to win an AL or NL only, like you all have done, you have to not only be right on your big players, you have to be right on your little players. And, we happen to have been right about a bunch of those, but you're going to cut some guys, right? So why not take some shots that you can just have a much more secure lineup? You can't have 4 $1 hitters. You can't win that way, in my view. That doesn't work. But 1 or 2 that you're rotating around with your fab budget, and the worst case scenario is you're wrong about one of you 2. And if you get a Cedric Mullins, well, you're off to the races.
Now, in terms of breakdown going into the draft, do you guys have a breakdown in terms of percentage? And I know with Glenn and Rick, it's pretty extreme hitter to pitcher, as he proved last year. But I think you did it also in 2020, a very similar style for the shortened season. It was similar, but actually when we drafted 2020, we didn't know that it was going to be a shortened season, but it was a lot of $1 pitchers. So Fred, going to you, or no, Steve, I'll go to you. Steve, what is your breakdown in terms of hitter pitcher? Is it flexible? And I'm sure it's somewhat flexible, but if you had to give a basic idea in an only, where do you typically land?
I'm absolutely flexible. And one of the things with the difference just between AL and NL labor, which I'm most familiar with, one of those leagues will spend a lot more on hitting than it will on pitching in the AL. And then in the NL, when you have people like Doug Dennis who don't want to spend anything on pitching, and there are other people that do want to spend on pitching in that league. So to me, first of all, it depends on the league. But in general, I go in with maybe, the baseline is 2/3, 1/3 spending on hitting and pitching. And then when you're in the auction room, and you are in the middle of things and can see or sense things changing, if pitchers aren't going for as much as maybe they should, then I have no problem whatsoever in shifting some of that budget to pitching and away from hitting, or vice versa.
Fred, up over to you.
Yeah, I would usually go a little like, okay, so let's say the standard is that kind of, what is it, 180-80 kind of split. I probably in an only would maybe lean a little more hitting, be interested in going a little over 180. I don't think wouldn't really go to like 200 or something, but I might try to jam in one or two more, like go to 190, take a couple of like $1, $2, $3 hitters and maybe make them maybe a little more playing time secure, or try to get a little more depth. The difficult thing with an auction, right, is that you can't if it was a draft, you could draft a bunch of you could start your draft with whatever 20 hitters if you wanted to in an only draft if you wanted to, or something like that, or get a couple aces and then draft 20 hitters. Like you could do that, but you can't in the auction. So your bench is not going to have regular starting players with any sort of skill level on it. So I'll shift a little bit, maybe to hitting, but not for sure. But I think I'm more willing to do that.
Glenn, Big Glenn, Mr. Glenn.
Yeah, thank you. Never been called big before. That's very cool.
Hall of Famer. A lot of Hall of Famers on this.
Yeah, well, we got 3 future and me. I don't know how I got there.
Steve Gardner. Sorry, go ahead. Here we go.
Well, he's about to be, right? He's
Right,
about
indeed.
to be rightfully so. Congratulations,
Rightfully
Steve.
so. Congratulations.
We're usually in the onlys somewhere between 190 and 200. And we have no problem going to 200. And that's what we did actually in Tout Wars successfully in AL last year. It's partially belief that we can find pitching. It's partially belief that if we work hard enough, we'll get an extra closer, that we're really watching the wire carefully. But it's also because the hitting is just, I think, more predictable. I think pitching varies so much more dramatically than hitting. And if you spend 200 on hitting or 195 or whatever, if your hitting runs away with it, it's a trading league. It's not an FBC. So you can trade your excess hitting in July or August. And that's actually what we did in Tout Wars AL. We ended up trading away Tim Anderson. We traded away another hitter. We got Lance McCullers. We got Luis Garcia, and just fortified the pitching staff at the end of the year. So especially in trading leagues, and I don't have to tell Ian or Fred about trading. It's sort of like, like lecturing, Mike Trout on being good at baseball. You guys know it. And so you can trade from strength. And that's part of the strategy, is if your hitting is running away with it, you could trade for strength. But we're not that flexible. We have a plan and we have a realistic budget. If you think, I'm going to get Aaron Judge for $15 or whatever, that's just foolhardiness. But if you have a realistic budget, you should be able to stick to that budget pretty close. And we do.
That's a great point too, Glenn, you were making about being able to trade. If you feel confident in your ability to get things that you may need later on, you don't have to necessarily build a balanced roster. And, we all would love to come out of the auction or out of the draft with a team that we think can just go right to the top of the standings and stay there all season. But generally, you can't. And if you do happen to have more speed or more saves or whatever, at least in some leagues, and I think we need to kind of make this an overriding factor as we talk about this discussion. You don't have too many draft NL only leagues or AL only leagues. For the most part, as we said earlier, most of these are auction leagues. And so that's what makes it, more difficult to build your team. And, you have to have different plans of attack and different odds or actions during the season.
It's a lot more fun. I mean, auctions are just so much fun. It's tough to, but once you pop, you can't stop. Like once you go down that road and you are an auction player, going back to a draft it doesn't have the same joy. I'll talk about my breakdown a little bit. I tend to go a little bit more pitching than everybody, I think. The reason I do that is, and I want to talk about this next, is closers, especially in this time where in the NFBC and in DC championships, people are being drafted. You have Liam Hendricks being drafted in the second round. I do not oppose. I mean, I'm not all for that. I don't think you grab him at 16, but I understand it. I really do. I understand the value of getting a closer who I call it the clubhouse situation, right? The back page. I look at closers and I look for who, if they lose their job, is it going to be on the back page of the newspaper? Those are the closers I'm looking for. Because if Aroldis Chapman loses his job, it's going to be a big deal. And everyone's going to go around and say, hey, what do you think? What do you think? To me, that means he's safe. Edwin Diaz, he's a back page closer. Kenley Jansen, while he was on the Dodgers, definitely a back page closer. Liam Hendricks is a back page closer. Josh Hader's a back page closer. So to me, paying that extra for that guy that you can pretty much assure is going to hold that job is worth it. So in AL only, that's why I end up spending a little bit more on pitching, because I'm going to go and acquire one of those guys, if not try to get 1.5 of those guys. Where do you guys go with closers? How do you handle? So moving from the breakdown, how do you handle closers? And Steve, I'm going to start with you.
I think you hit on part of my philosophy as well, especially when you're talking about an only league. If you're in a mixed league, for instance, you have not only the, if you're fishing for saves during the course of the season, you have just those teams without a lockdown closer to pick from. You open it up to the other league, and now you have an even bigger pool of players to pick from. If you don't have any of those lockdown guys in an only league to start, you're kind of fishing all season long. And if you have, fab budgets to worry about and, where your resources going to go, I think we're seeing now so many teams like to go to that closer by committee, or the high leverage guy is the guy that comes in the 7th inning if the game is on the line. And there aren't many teams now that can just give you, those saves, set it, forget it. And I think the bidding will go up. The price has gone up, as you mentioned, on some of those Liam Hendrickses and the Josh Haders of the world. And that leaves the rest of folks who kind of get left out, fighting for the scraps. And nobody really likes to do that during the course of the season, because the hit rate is not great at all.
Fred, where are you on closers? I mean, are you willing to make the big investment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because those, especially in an only where your innings pitched as a team are lower than in a mixed league, then the closer is going to influence your ratios even more than he will on a mixed league team, right? Because in a mixed league team, you're going to compile more innings. So the 65 or 70 innings from Liam Hendricks is going to help your team more in an only, because you're going to throw less total innings. So, so I'll pay for one of those guys. In the NL last year, I ended up with Kenley Jansen. Nobody wanted Kenley Jansen. Nobody believed in him. To me, he was a bit of a back page closer, kind of like he has a name for sure. And then I also like to throw some closer darts, because that's where you can really help your team separate. So get your closer. I mean, you might not be able to afford to totally do that if you're spending 20 on Hader or something like that. But if you can get a closer you believe in, whether it's $20, whether it's 14, whatever. But if you could throw a couple either closer darts or like setup man darts, like a couple setup men where you're thinking like, I do not trust the guy who's ahead of him, I could see this guy getting in. That's where you could help your team to separate, because once that guy turns, if you're right, and that's the fun of the only, right? That's where you put your money where your mouth is. If you're right, then you've all of a sudden backed into another closer who is worth a lot on the trade market in an only, and you got him for $1 or $2. And you get rewarded for being right and really having looked at that roster and thought, I think they're going to trade their closer in July and he's going to take over. Or I think this closer isn't going to last until May and this other guy's going to take over. So I like to grab a few relievers. Say I'm going to probably, like in the auction part, I'm going to probably get 4 relievers, a closer, and then 3 setup men who I like.
Say that again. Fred, say that again.
So out of my 9 pitchers,
yeah,
I'm probably going to get 4 relievers in an only, 1 closer, and then probably 3 setup men who I like, who I think can rack up strikeouts, who can have helpful ratios, and then who can keep my innings down so that my aces and my stud closer contribute mathematically even more to my ERA and my whip. So, and I can move those guys in and out of my lineup, as I find starters maybe during the season. But I'm going to, last year I ended up grabbing Jake McGee for a few bucks, Stephen Crichton, who got a few saves, Dylan Floro, who ended up getting a few saves. Those are just teams that I felt like were in flux at the closer position.
And those are guys that you got during the auction, or those guys?
I can't remember on Floral, but I think so. The other two for sure, and for cheap, $1, $2, $3, whatever. So, I think that's a way where you can set yourself up for the trade market. Is if you read some bullpens right, all of a sudden, how much was Jake McGee worth in a trade by the end of April? Right, he was Giants' full-time closer, and and you could get a $15, $20 hitter probably for him at that point.
Mr. Colton, sir. Mr. Colton, sir.
So, Rick Wolf and I have our SMART system. It's an acronym, and the R stands for reliever. And for many years, we were big believers in you got to get that one, what you call back page closer, and then you can fill in around it. The prices have gotten so bad that we've become somewhat fatalistic about it. We're willing to go to a number, and then we're not willing to chase beyond whatever that budgeted number is, whether it's 18 or 20 or 22, whatever it is, given the roster construction. But the lesson we've learned is forget the ugly middle. The ugly middle is awful. From last year, the Rafael Monteros and the Trevor Rosenthals and whatever. So in Tout Wars AL, and there's a reason we won, because we were right about so many of these things, which you don't always get this kind of year. But we spent a total of $7 on Emmanuel Clase, Jordan Romano, and Kendall Graveman. So that's a lot of saves for $7. And the theory was they were each behind very weak closers. So we had a ton of hitting. And instead of spending, $16, $17 on a bad closer, we converted a bad hitter into Bo Bichette, and then you can always trade later. So the lesson, in a long-winded fashion, is stay away from the ugly middle.
I'll have one more thing too, Ian, before we get off of closers. In an only league, it does allow you the ability to, as Fred was talking, if you're not sure who's going to have the closer's job, to be able to speculate on maybe both of the guys and try and, if you take James Karinchak, for instance, maybe also you can get Emmanuel Clase as well. And then it doesn't really matter, if you think those are both of the guys that are going to be, one of them is going to close. You can sort of corner the market a little bit for a lot cheaper, a lot of times, than paying up for a Liam Hendricks or somebody like that. The Cardinals bullpen, I think, was another one last year where we didn't know was, yeah, exactly. I mean, was Gallegos the guy? Was Jordan Hicks going to come back? No, it was Alex Reyes that ended up taking over the job and being great, for 5/6 of the season. And I'm looking at some of the prices from Labor NL last year. Reyes was a $5 closer. Jake McGee was a $4 closer.
Yeah.
Clase was a $2 closer in AL. So
who had that? Who got Clase?
I can't remember.
That's skills ahead of roles. That's for sure. That's
figuring out a full bullpen though it has to be part of your draft strategy for an only, right? So sitting down and going through each team's bullpen and estimating this is how much, like the Brewers bullpen with Hader and Devin Williams last year was going to cost you like 30. Right? Because Hader was going to go for like 21 and Devin Williams was going to go for a few. And then you start figuring out the different bullpens, right? And you're like, oh, I think I could get the Marlins. Like I could get Yimi Garcia and the next two alternatives for like a total of 14. And that's not bad. Like the Marlins are going to get saves. If I think that between him and the two alternatives, I'm going to lock those saves in for 14. Like you can't do that in a mixed league. You don't have the roster spots, but in an only, you should absolutely break down every team's bullpen in your league and how much you expect, kind of the closer and the setup man or the two setup men to go for, because maybe there's a bullpen and you want to just own the whole thing.
And the great thing we were talking about with the $1 players too, I mean, you can cut them and you will cut them during the course of the season to pick up other guys. So, if you happen to say, oh, well, I guess I made a mistake on that one, it doesn't have to cost you all season long. You could be rid of that guy in 2 or 3 weeks.
Although in labor rules are slightly different. I love the labor rules. I mean, they're a little too deep to get into right now. But they do adjust things. Before last year's draft, I spent a lot of time talking with Ariel Cohen, as I mentioned.
Do it.
On
Do it.
Nope, not yet. Not yet. Will not happen. Not yet.
We're only halfway through this segment.
Yeah,
I think we can pull it out of him before we're done.
It's possible. It's definitely possible. But he was really pushing me. He's like, Ian, I mean, if you were to get Nick Anderson, Diego Castillo, and who's the last one? I forgot who the third one was, but there was a third one at the same time. And he really advocated for all three of them. And I was like, yeah, I don't want to do that this year. I'm not going to do it because it would have cost $34 or so. It was Nick Anderson, Diego Castillo. I think it was Fairbanks. So you were looking at like $9 for Fairbanks. You were looking at, I got Diego Castillo for $8 and Nick Anderson went for $14. None of them ended up at the closing job starting in July, right? Anderson went out with injury. Fairbanks was in and out. Ended up being Kittredge. That's the only thing that makes me nervous. I mean, I got lucky in AL Labor last year. I bought 3 closers in the auction. I bought a Hendricks for $22, just outspending Larry Schechter, who was going back and forth with me all the way. And then I got Diego Castillo for $8. And then I got Gregory Soto for $3. And it was actually that Gregory Soto one that ended up being the most valuable. Because then I ended up flipping him for Max Kepler and Chris Flexen and Nick Anderson, which then turned into a trade-in thing. But getting lucky on closers is extremely, extremely fortunate.
But I'm going to challenge the word lucky on that. Soto was behind an electric arm on a bad team that could, go with the growing pains of a young closer behind guys who were not really likely to keep the job, right? And there wasn't a lot there. So it's not luck. You analyze the pen, as Fred was saying, and you sit there and say, yeah. And then look, if you look at some of these other examples in AL only, you have, Trevor Rosenthal, for example, hadn't thrown, more than 40 innings in 4 years combined. So, taking a shot at Trevino or Diekman, both of whom, gave great value, made sense. Graveman behind, throwing 95, 96 in the pen is a totally different pitcher. And he was behind Montero, who had 8 career saves or something like that. And, Karinchak had a month and a half of good, baseball and a wild streak, which is terrible for a closer unless you name Wild Thing. So those are studied guesses. They're studied, educated guesses. They're not luck, in my opinion, anyway.
I think you're right. About that.
There you go.
Let's talk about Fab. Let's talk about Fab for a minute. I watched in AL Labor last year teams hoard their money for July for the trade deadline. I did not do that. And I don't do that because I love finding Andy Ibanez for $1 or $2 and watching. Like, one of my tricks is I want to see the guy who gets 3 games in the week before, 2 to 3 games, gets to start and does well in those 2 to 3 games. Those are the guys I'm going to go take a shot on because, hey, all we're looking for is the guy who literally, it's literally like I'm lighting a lot of fires in the wintertime, is literally like you just want to see the guy who the match is going to take and then it's going to go, because that makes all the difference in only leagues. And it's not like, how did he do? Like, I don't look at the box scores for all the games for my only leagues to see, like, what do my guys do? I look to see who's in the lineup. That's it. And then everything else that happens after that will be delightful. And I want them to do well because it'll mean they'll get more at bats. It feels to me when I watch guys who have $100 at the trade deadline, because in labor, you'll get money back if you trade in injured guys. It feels like you get that one piece. So guys saved up all their money to get Kyle Schwarber or Craig Kimbrell. And I don't know. I'm not saying it's wrong. I don't get that from my perspective. And I'm curious if someone has can school me on it and say, well, here's why you're wrong, Ian.
Well, you can't argue with somebody who's won leagues. I mean, it worked at that particular time, and if it continually works for you, then you can't say it's wrong. I think there are several different approaches, and I will take the opposite one, Ian, is I generally, in only leagues, I will wait and hold on to a good chunk of my Fab dollars until the trade deadline, because I know that there are going to be trades and there are going to be impact players. If I can find an impact player earlier in the season, great. But what I've found in going back through, and this is something that is interesting to do if you have the time, is going back through the players that were picked up during the course of a season, and especially in only leagues, and see who were the difference makers. I found an awful lot of times where guys that you picked up during the season, early in the season, that were difference makers weren't guys that you paid $20 for, or, paid a huge chunk for. It were guys that you picked out and said, this guy is going to have some value later, and really rarely paid more than $5 for, but you just got him because you were a week early than everybody else. And I think those are you can make the impact pickups with those low dollar guys early in the season and still have money for the big pickup at the trade deadline. I think that's the way that is worked best for me.
Great. Fred, what are your thoughts on the big pickup?
Yeah, I'm more of a spender. I actually like to get rid of some early just so that I'm not in first place in the fab race, and then I just don't have to worry about it anymore. But I don't want to be out of money left at the deadline. So I want to be able to get in on that because there's more players who come over or players who emerge with starting jobs because other players left, I think, than we realize. So we're all chasing like the one or two guys at the top, but there's like a dozen guys that week after the deadline. It's not one or two guys. I want to get 2 or 3 of the dozen because I have some budget left. Also, the dirty little secret is not everyone in your league's going to still be bidding on August 1st, right? Some people are going to have checked out a little bit. Every league has someone in 10th place and 11th place at that point, and maybe they just don't even bother anymore. So you don't have to be if you're not at the very top, you're not getting the very top guy. But if you're 5th, you can probably get 2 or maybe 3 just useful guys. I like to bid along the way. I remember last year I grabbed Tyler Anderson really early, just knowing he had a rotation spot, and that matters in an NL only. And Zach McKinstry was playing a bit for the Dodgers, and then that just kept me out of the top. And then from there, I just a guy here, a guy there. Huskar, I spent a little bit on at one point. Then he broke his hand. He was going along great till he broke his hand. But I think at the deadline, I was probably about 5th in fab. I had enough left that I grabbed Frank Schwindel, who wasn't a hot commodity yet. Freddie Galvis, who is just kind of like a pet player of mine, and come over to the NL. And I was like, he'll play 3 days a week and do something. And then I think I grabbed Keber Ruiz, who wasn't. Remember, he didn't start with the Nats. Like, he went down in the minors when they first traded for him. So he wasn't like a hot commodity. But I grabbed some guys who could kind of fill in some depth, and I didn't need to be winning to grab that. And I actually can't remember who the number 1 over to the NL player was last year. But I wasn't in on him. And there might have been someone I missed out on or whatever. But I'd rather go. I also think it's more fun throughout the year to just be competitive in every week's fab bidding rather than just kind of have to sit on your hands. But Steve's right. Like, you don't. The $100, the $200 out of 1,000 budget guy, in April, even in an only, doesn't always turn out to be something. I think I probably spent 20 out of 1,000 on Tyler Anderson, maybe 30 out of 1,000 on Tyler Anderson. Not a lot, but I saw him as someone who I thought had okay skills and was in a rotation in the NL, and that made him worth picking up. So I'm not a hoarder for fab, but I'd like to have a little. I want to be in that game at the deadline. Maybe grab something that can help me.
And Tyler Anderson was better than the last guy on your roster who was in your starting lineup, which is really the important thing that we want to stress is when you're picking up guys, just make your roster a little bit better. And in the only leagues, it's a lot harder to get the guys that boost you tremendously. You've got to make those incremental gains throughout the season.
Glenn, what do you think?
So a couple of things. One thing no one has brought up, which I think is really important, is what are the league rules? And Labor and Tout Wars are so dramatically different. Labor has a $1 minimum bid, and it's a $100 fab budget. So you can run out of money fast. Whereas Tout Wars is 1,000, and you have $0 bids, and you can trade fab. So the
Huge
approach
difference.
it's not one size fits all. The other thing I would say is, for me, I don't want to be in the middle again. Like, if there's a hole on my team or a star, we're going to go chase him, but we're not just going to churn the roster for the sake of churning the roster. As Steve said, if there's somebody out there, go get him. I don't want to be in the middle and find out I just chased, guys that, why did I bother with that bid? Or I should have known better, or I got Gombered, as the fantasy industry now calls it, or Joe Rost, even though that might be a sore spot there. But and the other thing to remember is, do you really believe in the player? So in Tout Wars AL, we looked at our team. Obviously, we spent 200 on hitting, so the hitting was much stronger. We lost Shane Bieber after 100-something great innings. And here's Shane McClanahan. And you got to do your homework. And I started watching tape, and I was like drooling. The tape was ridiculous. I mean, the stuff that he was throwing, it's just a phrase. I understand.
Old school.
But okay.
That's real old school. VCR. We may have some kids watching who don't know what a tape is. Right.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Pecan rewind. Sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, you have to. Somebody cranking the
Right.
the flicker, right? But seriously, then that was a player I thought was a difference maker. And the other thing I would say is, because there is really no trades after July 31st, there used to be, waiver-based trades, and maybe there will be again. I don't know what the CBA will say, but there were trades that were happening throughout the last 2 weeks of July. And if I wasn't near the top of the money, I would bid big on the first potential guy that comes out, because I know that the other guys who are at the top of the fab chart might be holding back for the big trade the next week. So the opportunity was to get out early and get somebody. So, it's all things to really think about. And again, in, a league like Labor, where if you have to cut somebody from your roster if they aren't injured or in the minors to make a pickup, you got to be much more careful than a league like Tout Wars, where you do have free reserve ability. And that affects how I manage the fab budget as well. Because if I have to cut somebody outright, I'm a little less likely to do that than where I can just stash them on reserve to make a space for my fab pickup.
But one point I want to make, I'm just going to make, sorry, Steve.
No, go ahead.
One more point I want to make it though. I remember when the injuries in these leagues, and if I'm moving somebody down to the injured list in Labor, which is a gorgeous thing to be able to do, you move somebody down to the injured list, you can keep them there and then pick somebody up, and it doesn't really cost you anything. I don't want to have an empty slot in my lineup. I just don't. And to me, and because it costs you $1 to pick somebody up every time you do it, it just doesn't strike me, we're going to get to reserve picks in a minute. It doesn't strike me. It strikes me as good use. I picked up Carlos Hernandez in AL Labor last year in July. I think it was a $2, $3 pickup, or maybe it was even a $4 pickup because I was so in love, and put him right into my lineup, which was incredibly valuable for the way that my season went. And to me, when I watch really great, that's why I'm glad I brought this up, and hopefully it was taken in the way that it was intended, which is I don't understand it. From my perspective, it doesn't make sense that you wouldn't constantly be refurbishing the roster because you miss out on these opportunities. But it was really good to hear both sides. And Steve, wrap it up for us.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, Glenn, you were talking about somebody that was traded earlier. Wasn't there a guy that crossed leagues last year that ended up being a difference maker that was traded in June before all of the big trade deadline stuff hit? Those are definitely guys to be able to jump on if you don't have the most at that particular time. And I remember Fred was talking, reminded me of something, the pressure that you have if you have the most fab dollars. Who do you take? I can remember an NL Tout Wars year where I had the most, and I was so excited for the trade deadline, and it was such a dud. And the biggest name out of all of the players to come over from the AL was the outfielder Travis Snyder, formerly of the Blue Jays,
That's what
going
I'm
to
saying.
the Pirates. And I felt compelled. I've got to bid $71 because he's the best guy, and I don't want to be caught, with all of this money and nobody to spend it on. And, he was a complete dud for the rest of the season. So there are definitely some drawbacks to hoarding that money for later in the year.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I go back to the Fred point about it's just really fun. Like the Sunday night at midnight, like making sure that you get your bids in, and then for labor at RT, it says we're working on this and it's in process. We'll let you know. And then
Come
those like two,
on.
right? No, those 2 hours, and then it's just like I gotta go to bed, man. I can't say I gotta go to bed, but then when I wake up first thing Monday morning, I mean I miss so much. I don't play fantasy football, so like I really do miss that experience of like, God, I'm awesome, and that's really fun. All right, Fred, I'm going to start with you on this. When you think of reserves, and I want to, when you think of reserve picks, I think, do you play? You don't play labor only.
I'm mixed in labor.
You're mixed in labor.
Yeah.
And this may be slightly different for labor rules because it's different. So let's just start with you first with how you handle reserve picks in the Tout Wars world, and then I do want to talk about the labor world a little bit too. So start with there, Fred, if you would.
Yeah, so we get 4, right, in Tout, and if I can get it, almost anyone in a rotation, like I'll probably take a shot at them. I mean, you can always find middle relievers on the waiver wire, even in an only. So probably not. I'm going to draft my relievers or buy them in the auction or however you want to say it. But if there's anyone left in a rotation who I have maybe any ounce of hope for, I'll probably grab them and hold them for a couple weeks just to see, because there's upside there. But then I'd love to grab even a part-time hitter, like someone who I think could get to 350, 400 plate appearances. If there's anyone out there left that would be my first priority. And then I grab, just like I say, like anyone. I've never really been the prospect guy who grabs those prospects and on his bench and holds them until they get called up. I'm not usually that guy. I'm kind of looking to just get, like you said, like I don't like to take zeros if I can avoid it. So I'm trying to get live bodies who I think can play even part-time, because you're going to have injuries, especially in April. Right? Don't you find like you have so many injuries in April that it's hard to even fill out a full lineup? So if I can get a couple hitters who I think will play 50% of the time or more on their respective teams, and if I could try to get a couple starting pitchers who, admittedly, I don't really believe in, otherwise I would have paid $1 for them, but I see a glimmer of hope. Those are the Tyler Anderson types, right? Who made it all the way through our reserve draft last year. But anyone like that.
Great. And, there was a couple of years ago, Colton and the Wolfman, they won AL Labor and beat our friend Clay Link.
He's still sore about that.
And he is sore about it. Sore is a good word for it, too. He is still sore about it. And it all comes
We
down.
love Clay, by the way. Phenomenal player.
What's not to love? And a lovely man, a dear friend. What's not to, what you did was in that draft, you took, do you want to tell him? Because I know, and I wasn't even in the league at this time. You took Bo Bichette in the reserves.
3rd overall pick in the reserves.
And Bo showed up later.
Bo knows baseball.
Bo knows, Glenn knows baseball. Rick and Glenn know baseball. And now what Clay is doing is he's drafting these guys in the draft. Because he doesn't want to get left out with them. And I'm curious, just because the labor rules are such that if you draft a player, they either have to be in your lineup or they have to be in the minor leagues or they have to be dropped. You can't sit somebody in these, which is, it's such a puzzle. It's such a fun little puzzle to play in. How does that affect for you, Glenn? For you guys, how does that affect how you think about prospects in the auction and then in the reserves? And then there's also, if I might say, the Derek Carty version where you take 5 pitchers and then you just stream the better pitcher every week.
So that's a labor thing, because in labor, the rules are that you can reserve freely, go back and forth, guys that are original reserve picks. So I love that strategy of Derek Carty's, and we've used it where you pick your 9th pitcher is a guy is going to start the season on the IL, and you have 4 or 5 different pitchers on your reserve list, and you can play matchup, or if you don't like any of the matchups, you throw your strikeout middle reliever in there. I think that's an excellent strategy for labor. And I am much more willing in labor to go after the guy who might not come up till June or July, but is a huge star, because you have 6 reserve spots. In Tout, you only have 4. So you have to really watch your rules. The thing about Tout Wars in the AL only and NL only, I think, is the same. You only get 4 reserve spots, but you can play 10 pitchers. you can use your swing position as a pitcher. So I will typically draft almost all pitchers on my reserve list, because if it turns out that I have a hitter that's, not playing or whatever, nicked up but not on the IL, so you can't put him on the IL, you can just play a pitcher. So you can still get valuable stats that way, if you do that. But in labor especially, I want to have one or two shots at a big time difference maker. A Julio Rodriguez this year. And I'll say this, you have arrived when a player of Clay Link's caliber is doing things solely to thwart you. You have arrived.
Yeah, well, you've arrived. Headline, ding, 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 ding. You've arrived. Big time. Hall of Famer. Steve, what are your thoughts about prospects and reserve picks and all that?
Couple of things that I like to do. Number one, I like to look at my roster and maybe see if there's a weak spot in the guys that I have drafted. And maybe if, I have a horrible second catcher and there's a minor leaguer possibly that's coming up, or a catcher that went undrafted that's just as good as the other catcher, I will look at that and say, okay, where can I bolster my roster the best and pick one of those guys. Another strategy in the reserve rounds is, guys, if there are still any left over, who have multiple position eligibility, because those reserve spots are so helpful in filling injury spots where guys get hurt. If you have somebody that can fill multiple positions, a Tyler Wade or somebody like that, that's kind of an only kind of guy that we'll see. You can draft him in the reserve round, and then you can put him at shortstop, or you can put him at second base, or you can put him in the outfield if you have an injury there. So those are the kinds of things, in addition to, maybe digging like Glenn was talking about for that prospect that may be coming up. Brandon Marsh was a guy that I got in reserve round last year in AL labor. Guys like that also can certainly help you. I'm all over the board in my reserve picks, but I do have some pet strategies and pet types of players that I look for.
So let me throw one more thing in the only leagues, especially this year, because God knows what the world will be like when we actually do the auction. I mean, especially labor, which is, March, I think 4th and 6th. There are going to be there are going to be unsigned free agents. And the rules are in the typical early leagues is if that guy signs in your league, let's say you're playing in AL only, then you get to keep him. If he doesn't, you got to cut him. So I will often roll the dice in the reserve round on a guy that is a huge difference maker if he signs in your league. So it didn't work out last year in Tout Wars. I think both Tout and Labor. Why is the name escaping me? The guy with the Dodgers with the cannon arm who never ended up. Yasiel Puig.
Yep.
For a reserve pick, that could have been a huge difference.
Yeah, but it wasn't a reserve. I think I think what you did, I think you guys bid a couple of bucks on him, if I remember.
If it's $1 for your last player when no one else can take an outfielder, that's the equivalent of.
Yeah, no downside to that. But I do have that question. How do you, Fred? How do you handle that? How are you going to handle players or someone like Craig Kimbrell that is in the AL? Although how are you
you can draft because he's on a 40-man AL roster. So think of a Correa, for example.
Yeah. How are you going to handle Correa? Carlos Correa? Do you draft him? Do you take him with the idea that he's, and then you end up spending, so his price was probably going to be about $23 for Carlos Correa. You'll probably get him for $11 now or $12 now, and then poof, he's gone.
Or poof, you have a huge bargain.
You have a huge bargain. Yeah, I guess so. Mathematically, if you think he's 50-50 to go to either league, I guess you want more than a 50% discount. I don't really want to tie up my fund for 6 months in whether some of these guys sign in the AL or the NL, right? Like, I think I would mostly be an avoider. The deal would have to be really good. Like, I guess I'd have to have more than a 50%, at least more than a 50% discount, right? Maybe like a 70% discount to make it worth my trouble. Because and I'd probably take one, right? I guess you could steer right into it if there was more than one. You could get 4 of them and get 4 and be like, hey, if I'm right on,
we had that happen. Yes.
Right. I mean, that could be a good way to hedge your bets. You get like 4 or 5 of them, and you say, well, if I'm right on 3 or more, and I'm getting them all for half price, then I'm fine.
And you can cut them instantly too if they're not
That's
on your
right.
team, so you
That's
can fill
right.
that roster spot right away.
So that would be a fun way to do it if there were that many free agents, is to just get a bunch of them and just see where the dust settles, and if you're getting good enough discounts. But I don't know if you get that. Do you think you get that big of a discount? Like, do you think you
No,
get
you
more
won't
than
get
50%?
70%.
There will
depends on the
always
time
be
of the auction.
somebody, though.
Look,
Yes.
Don't you think? There's
Here-
always going to be somebody who's willing to. Okay, I'll take the risk for another $1. I'll go another $1.
It depends on when during the auction. If there's a bunch of people sitting there with $200 left to spend, go in an extra $2 on Correa to go to 16 or 17, and you may lose it, is no big deal. He comes out in the third hour. People are much less likely to. This is my last big hitter. It changes so it really depends, and that's a big auction thing, right? When the player comes out, it's a much bigger thing in an only league than in a deep mix.
Absolutely.
It really is. I mean,
Yep.
we
didn't even get into that, but yeah, throw Correa in the first 5 minutes, right? Freeze the room.
That price would be what? Well, let's do it. Let's imagine we're all in AL only, and Carlos Correa. I'm going to put him up for $1.
$5.
$5 going 6.
9.
I'll go 11.
I'm out.
Going once. Going twice. 12. I'll go 12. I'll go 12.
Oh,
no. I got it in there.
oh,
Just like you did with me and Aaron Judge in 2020.
I thought I heard
and
a
you
soul.
know you did it. You know that happened in 2020.
And now this is flustering me because I'm like, oh, geez, I can't let Ian have it for 12.
And then I'm going to get out. That'll be it. That'll be the extent of it. Well, you know what? If I just want to wrap, we're wrapping. We're going to wrap it in 1 minute. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank everybody for most especially to Glenn, to Fred, to Steve, to Nick for hosting us, and everyone at Pitcher List. And if you have an opportunity, please do make a donation because the money is going to Feeding America and to Pitcher List, and it's a great organization, Feeding America, as is Pitcher List. So thank you guys. Thank you. This was as much fun and as educational as I really thought it was going to be. So Fred Zinkie, Steve Gardner, Glenn Colton, thank you guys. Anyone have a last word before Nick joins us again? I'm sure it'll be momentarily.
I will say that I do have a new strategy after playing in Labor AL with Ian Kahn. Ian hates it, but I call it the Ian +1. If Ian likes him, he's worth another $1.
No. Do not. Please do not. Don't do that.
I wouldn't at least admit it, but that's the ultimate compliment, Ian. So there you go.
Well, I'll take it. I will take it. Looks like Spore is Paul Spore, our friend, just posted something in there, but I know they've got the next person coming in. No, keep going. We can do another 5. Oh, well, Paul's
he's
doing this for radio.
Ian.
Yes, sir.
If we had another guest, maybe who does his own ATC projections.
Well, I got to tell you, I really didn't want to bring it out, and it's not really appropriate for me to do it on video because I don't really look like him at all. But Ariel, Jesus, Paul Spore, you owe me. You owe me, Paul Spore.
So good. Now, when Spore's message came up, I thought of, the taxi episode. What does a yellow light mean?
Oh, yes.
Down. But look, there's so many topics that we could talk about, and I really think
you got it. Go.
Yeah, no, I mean, I really think that when we were talking about the budgeting, you really have to have in an only league. It's even more important to have plan B, C, D, and E, because the unpredictability of the prices of the few, lockdown starters. I mean, I think in the AL, I had 2 last year that I thought of as lockdown starters. The number of, shortstops or third baseman that shortstop's a little deeper, but maybe third baseman or second baseman that you really felt confident in, or the number of guys who are going to steal 30 bases. There's so few of all of those that you really can't, no matter how good you are, be certain that the price isn't going to go off the wall. And so you have to have a plan. Okay, if I want Kohler Bieber, but I can't get them, then I'm going to have to pivot to this, and I'm going to move the money around this way. And then if that doesn't happen, I'm going to move the money around this way. There are a few guys, ladies, people who can just let the draft come to them. I can't. And I bet most of our, listeners and followers can't. So especially in only league, having fallback after fallback to me is just so critical.
Yes, because in the only leagues, it's not so regimented, is it? We've become so NFBC centric, so big contest main event centric. There's like blueprints for how to do it. Get your speed in these rounds, get your closers in these rounds. You got to have this many pitchers. There's no blueprint for only leagues. There's so few of them, right? That like you don't know, you can't, you have to have, like you said, Glenn, plan B, C, and D, because you don't know when you get in that room. If I was doing like an NFBC mixed auction, I could tell you almost exactly how much everyone's going to go for. It would be regimented based on their ADP. Like it would be so normal. It would matter a little bit what hour they come out in, things like that. But in the onlys, you don't know as much. I mean, I've always felt like you can make a pretty good guess how much everyone's going to go for just by looking at how much the players went for in the last auction. Or if you have access to it, average out the previous, say, 5 auctions in that league, and you can get a pretty good estimate of what the 10th most valuable hitter is going to go for, the 20th most valuable hitter is going to go for. But you don't know exactly who those players are going to be. So you have to have those backup plans.
Yeah,
I got a question
Steve,
for the group too, but
I think we're
we'll
wrapped.
save that
Steve,
for
I
another
think
time.
Oh,
the
here
yellow
comes
light
Big
is
Brother.
gone. Can't hear you there, Nick. Nick, can't hear you there, bud.
Hey guys, what's going on? That was amazing.
Hey.
I'm really doing this just to get Spore going, so that he knows I'm not just going to let him continue to stall and sit out of this. So I'm going to say this, and I think you guys already mentioned some, but I want to ruin all of your AL and NL only leagues that you're in together. So I want to hear from one of you really quickly, the one guy you have to get in your drafts this year. In an AL only, let's just go with Steve. One guy very quickly.
Let's see. Probably Miles Straw
Okay.
to get some
Ian.
steals, pay very little for him, and get regular playing time.
There we go. Ian.
I like Chris Bassett a lot, and I think that his price will be down because of the injury. So he's the kind of AL only guy that I kind of like. But
Love it.
really, actually, there's one other guy I'm going to say is Miguel Sano. I think Sano is going to be cheap.
There you go. All right, Fred.
John Means is a whip god. They have moved the fence. I'll give him a shot. Yeah, I'm going to get 8 wins, but maybe 7, but I'll take it. His whip influence in an only is huge.
They're going to win
That's a great
somewhere,
call.
You know, they're not going to win 10 games.
There you go. So I'm going to give you 2, Nick. 1 because
Great.
it's what I believe, and 1 because I'm going to suck up a little bit. Gary Sanchez. I think the value has fallen so far, and the catching position is so bad that where he used to be $25, almost $27 player in an only, I think that number is going to be like 15 this year. And given the situation, I mean, at most, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's one that I'm looking at. And the other one is Patrick Sandoval because it's just fun. It is so much fun to watch him pitch.
Oh, that changed it, man. That changed. I should have been wearing my 32 whiff shirt today.
I mean, it's must see TV.
Well, look who showed up finally, huh? Here he is.
Hey.
No, I'm just messing around with you. All right, guys, thank you so much for being here. Steve, Ian, Glenn, Fred, really thank you so much. That was an awesome panel.
Good job, guys.
Okay, thanks, guys.
I loved it.
Cheers.
I'm just messing with